Welcome to the Sleeping Barber Podcast.
We have a fantastic show today talking about the theory and practice of what makes effective ads. We've got Jon Evans, the Chief Marketing Officer at System 1, and Orlando Wood, the Chief Innovation Officer at System 1, also author of Lemon and Lookout.
Welcome to the Sleeping Barber Podcast, a place for business leaders to get the best and most credible information on marketing, strategy, and innovation. Your hosts, Mark Binkley and Vasilis Douros, share their experiences as they gather insights from the world's leading experts. Now, on with the show.
Welcome to the show today. We have two amazing guests, Orlando Wood and Jon Evans, both from System 1. Thanks for joining us, guys.
Pleasure. Thanks for having us.
Absolute pleasure.
This is great. I'm like super excited. We're just nerding out about our camera setups and mic setups. Jon, you're also the host of Uncensored CMO, which is one of our favorite marketing podcasts. You're also the Chief Marketing Officer at System 1 Group, which is one of the world's leading, or maybe the world's leading advertising effectiveness agency. So welcome.
Thank you.
And then Orlando, also from System 1, is Chief Innovation Officer there. And author of, I got Lemon here,
fantastic,
which is an amazing book. If I ever write a book, I'm going to totally steal all the layout and the design. It's just such a pleasure to read. It was really fun to read it.
Thank you. Yes. And it was, I owe the design to Grant Morrison, who brilliant designer who did that. And in fact, the next book as well, Lookout, he worked on both of them. So thank you.
Yeah.
Orlando,
yeah.
Can I do a quick plug for your book? The best quote on your book I've ever heard was, "It's such an amazing book that once you put it down, you can't pick it back up again."
That was my line, John. Yeah.
Because for people listening, I know it's audio, but for people listening, it's a substantial work, isn't it, Orlando?
But the second one is a bit thicker than the first one. Yeah, that's right.
But they really are they're really well researched books. They've got a lot, and we're going to get into some of this today. We'll talk more about both of the books. But both kind of looking at sort of what makes for effective advertising, and you have a lot of I don't even know how to say it exactly. You'll say it better, but you go into the history of art and the history of visual communication, and bringing it forward to present. It's just a fascinating blend of art and science. And so well done. And thanks for joining us both. So, we haven't really talked about the theme, but really we're talking about the theory and practice of effective ads. And so, I think from a point of view of the framework for the conversation, we're going to talk about, get into some of the theory, talk about Orlando's work and the evidence and the research that exists out there. Then we'll get into some of the practice. Jon, I know we've talked to you about some of the work System 1 has done in sort of evaluating good and bad ads and thinking about examples that we can talk about to highlight specific points. So really excited to chatting about this. Orlando, I wanted to start with this idea that I've seen this concept once before, but you make an interesting point at the very beginning of Lemon, that advertising has a noble role, maybe that's my words, in developing economies, quality of life, uplifting societies in a world today where we talk so much about purpose being, we all have to save the world. Yeah. Sometimes it's okay just to do great ads and be proud of the ads we're doing.
Well, it was a point I wanted to make up front in that book because, I think we've become a little bit apologetic about working in the industry. And when you think about, what it contributes to the economy, it is a, as you put it, you could argue it's a noble profession because, as I say, for every pound spent, on it in this country anyway, it gives you £6 contribution to GDP. That's a Deloitte study with the Advertising Association. It sustains growth and competitiveness. It creates employment, not just for the people who work in it, but for the people who, air it and use it. It leads to more affordable products and services. It's got a cultural benefit, so it helps to fund the arts, media, sports. And when it's done really well, I think it creates a kind of cultural bond, common reference points for everyone. That makes us all, feel like we belong to a great whole in some way, So I think there are many good things that it does. And it was a point I wanted to make early on in the book. Partly less than I think I was having a pop at advertising full stop, which I most certainly am not.
Well, and I appreciate that point because I think we get the shit kicked out of us a lot for just being advertisers, and a lot of people just kind of dismiss that, like, oh, ads, like roll their eyes and that kind of thing. And I think all the points made are super valid. And I think it's good for us to look at our own industry in a different light. Yeah. So I appreciate that. One of the things I found a little while ago, just to set up the discussion, is there's a bit of work that was done by Kantar and Paul Dyson. You guys, I'm sure familiar with it, looking at the top 10 drivers of advertising profitability. What marketers thought were the top 10 drivers in ranked order are not necessarily what actually are. And number 2 on the list, just behind brand size, is creative quality in terms of its actual profitability multiplier. The weird thing is marketers rank it much lower than it actually was. And so if there ever was such a silver bullet, I think, probably never is going to exist. But creative might be the thing that's closest to that. And then contrast that with the work you've done, Orlando, and it seems like there's a decline in effectiveness when we should be. The natural thing would be to assume that we're putting more time and energy making creative effective, and yet, because it's what is driving effectiveness and profitability. Can you talk a little bit about why you're saying, or what evidence you've seen, and talk about the decline in effectiveness?
Well, there are lots. So it's a big question, big topic. So there are a number of indicators to suggest that advertising is not as effective, or at least not working in the same way that it used to. And a lot of these come from the IPA, Peter Field, Les Binet, who looked back at the IPA's effectiveness database. And what they show through a number of different measures is that over time, and in particular the last 15 years, there's been this drop in a number of very large business effects that advertising achieves. And these are the best of the best campaigns here. They're all been submitted for the effectiveness awards. So, it's the canary in the coal mine, perhaps. And it tells you that, the number of business effects have declined, that when you overlay the creative awards on the IPA's effectiveness database, you see that they're not resulting in the same effects that they're used to, the ability to grow market share relative to how much is spent on them, share of voice. And Peter Field has recently even suggested in a presentation that we've done together that there's this sort of breakdown in the relationship between extra share of voice and market share gain. That that investing in share of voice is not giving the same the returns that you'd expect it to give you in terms of market share increases, and that really, that was the starting point for in fact a presentation at Cannes that we did, and I just repeated it last week with both Peter Field and Karen Nelson Field, trying to explain why it is that spend to market share growth is not performing as it used to. And we put it down to 3 things, really. The first, Peter pointed out, was the switch in spend away from brand building advertising towards performance advertising, which is really only there to pick the low hanging fruit. It doesn't continue to grow the brand. The second was, Karen pointed out, she's an attention measurement person that you probably know, and she talked about the the low levels of attention that many media platforms get today. And of course, you need high levels of attention, really, in your media choices to create the mental availability that you need to through your advertising. If you only got a second or two, it's really very limited in what you can do. And then the third one, which is, of course, the area of my two books, is I talked about this damaging shift in creative style towards a sort of advertising that looks more like performance advertising.
Right.
And that this style of advertising has become quite widespread since about 2006. I trace in my books this change in creative style. And it's quite mechanistic. It's quite linear in its, it's quite transactional. It's got lots of words on the screen, short, sharp cuts, no sense of lived time, very rhythmic, a loss of music, a loss of characters, a loss of jingles went a long time ago, but a loss of things that really, things like dialogue, that really captivate people, that make them connect with people, essentially. That hold
it's almost like the personality.
Memory, yeah. So this shift in so it's one of several things I think that have happened in this digital age.
Yeah.
And I think it's also tied in with a broader kind of cultural shift. And you mentioned the art in the books and everything else, but a cultural shift that tends to come about when you have these massive leaps, technological leaps, and we all start thinking very hard about how to use this new technology, and that brings about certain habits of thinking, linear habits of thinking that are not really given to the kind of brand building advertising that we actually need to think about more seriously in this digital age than ever before, because we need to maintain mental availability of our brands.
That's right. One thing we really enjoyed reading on as well is kind of like the left brain and the right brain and the nuances that exist. You talked about 2006 as kind of being like that point of where you started seeing that separation. Do you mind taking a moment and really kind of talking about the left brain versus the right brain?
Of course. Well, look, it's been long kind of dismissed and derided, this idea that the left and the right brain might do different things. And that's not... it's not that sort of popular science that I'm drawing on here. It's the work of an incredible, brilliant thinker, Ian McGilchrist, who is a neuropsychologist, and he looks at the way that the two hemispheres of the brain pay attention to the world. It's not that they do different things; they do things differently, he says. And so what he has done through a long life's work is to show that there are these different modes of attention associated with the left and right hemispheres, that the left hemisphere is very narrow in its attentional field, just the stuff in front of us, likes to look at things close up, to abstract them, take them out of context, break them up into smaller parts, categorize them. The sorts of things that a scientist or an engineer, I suppose, would be very good at doing, and that is largely what science becomes. Looking at things under a microscope, breaking things up into smaller parts. Trying to create a sense of linear cause and effect. And then there is the right hemisphere's modes of attention, which are very broad and kind of vigilant to what's going on around it. To things that are happening just slightly off stage, just slightly at the edge of your awareness, if you like.
Right.
Also deals with sustained attention. And it's the right hemisphere that presents the world to us in the first place, and anything of interest it gives over to the left hemisphere to break it down into these smaller parts, try and manipulate the world. And so he shows, through all sorts of studies, but also patients with left and right brain damage, he really builds an incredibly rich picture of how how these two hemispheres interact, but how they see the world and their different takes on the world.
Right.
And he shows that, at certain times in history, but also in individuals, the left brain can tend to dominate. And his work, enables you to look at the intersection between these modes of attention and creativity and the sorts of things that are of interest to the two hemispheres. So I talk in the books about the right hemisphere understanding people, their facial expressions, their gestures, their intonation, all of the things that make us who we are, really. About being able to understand metaphor, about being able to understand, that things can be true on two levels. That the right brain's is what tells the difference between a joke and a lie as well. And it understands music. It gives us a sense of lived time and depth, all of those things. So you can start to see, if you think about it, these are things that are really quite useful to know about for any advertiser trying to capture this broad beam attention in their advertising. And it's precisely those sorts of features of advertising, metaphor, humor, music, the living characters, which have been gradually disappearing, whilst at the same time, some of the things that the left brain's habits of thinking might prefer have become very present in advertising. Words on the screen. The left brain deals principally with language. These short, sharp cuts I was describing, rhythmic soundtracks. It likes to break things up into smaller parts, so you get these short, sharp cuts. And this loss of depth as well, because the left brain can't really do depth. So you get things looking rather flat. And you see just bits of people, just their hands, just their eyes, just their mouths, really close up. And that tends, as I show in my work, to push people away, to cause them to detach, and is not the kind of advertising that will, as I show, build mental availability, put your brand in memory, and ensure it becomes the instinctive, easy choice.
This may be an impossible question to answer, but kind of going back to 2006, is there just a few thoughts running through my head as you're talking about this? There's like transfers to digital begins around that time. Mobile phones begin around that time. There's this story around that time that I started hearing a lot, that people now have attention spans of a goldfish. And that we have to, build content, snappy and quick cut, like all those things you're talking about. And so then there's this, and which is total lie, but people don't have attention spans of a goldfish. They do in moments, but not all the time. And so I think there's this like story that we've been telling ourselves that kind of perpetuates this sort of direction in creative. And I think is that part of what defined, like, is there the technological changes to digital, the technological changes to mobile, and then sort of this underpinning story about like our attention spans getting shorter? Are those the kind of things that are causing this transformation to less and less? I certainly think creative effectiveness.
Yeah, I think the digital world has definitely had something to do with it. And in fact, just even constructing the data set for the advertising, the chronological analysis I did, anything before 2004 is very difficult to get hold of, because it was kind of before the digital kind of, records, as it were, began. So there was around that time, there were all sorts of things happening. As you mentioned some of them. Mergers and acquisitions in ad agencies were on the up. Things, the digital platforms were starting to pop up, and you start to see things change more broadly in culture, actually. And then I look at other data sets in culture. I look at the types of programming. I look at types of comedy shows. You look at car colors. They suddenly go white, black, or silver.
That's a great point.
Around this time. All sorts of things start shifting. And so gradually you get this sense that perhaps culture is losing some of its vitality, and and there's a sort of sense of detachment that you get. And you also get this sort of adversarial stance starting to take hold as well. Anger lateralizes to the left hemisphere too. So my second book, Look Out, I go into some of that in a bit more detail. And you get this sort of escape to fantasy, this sort of surrealism starts to creep into things, as well as the loss of humour, by the way. So, and this actually reflects, you saw it in other periods in history. It's very similar. We're living in a very similar time, I'm afraid, to about 1912, 1913, 1914 at the moment. Culturally, if you look at the kind of cultural works, the same sort of abstraction and the beginnings of surrealism. And even if I go back even further to the printing presses, around 1500, you start to see similar features appear in art then too. Particularly the stare, which I talk about, this sort of fixity. The left brain likes things to be fixed and rigid. And actually the stare is associated with certain kinds of mental illness that are associated with left brain dominance. So in advertising, you get a lot at the moment of this sort of staring at the camera blankly, terrified helplessness mixed with a desire to control. And that is particularly harmful for effectiveness, for capturing attention, for holding people, for keeping them engaged. It's not nice to be stared at. So you get a lot of these features in previous times, but in our time too, and that's why I called this book "Look Out," the latest book, because both we need to look out. We have a better broad beam kind of attention, not looking in and down at our phones and thinking in these very close up, literal ways. But we also need to watch out. We need to look out. Because I think there are signs in history that it hasn't gone well before. So it's a bit darker, but I hope there's always some light in it too, because I talk about the sorts of features of advertising that help to connect with people and help us navigate some of these difficult times.
What you just said there actually really resonated with me, thinking about even like something as simple as the color of vehicles. Popular now, but what's become popularized, you look at Audi and that flat gray that became extremely popular, and a lot of people buying that, or those flat colors now are becoming a lot more prominent. And I was watching one of your TED Talks there, and you kind of really articulated like the right brain features have declined, left brain features now dominate, and it is a cause for concern. But I think this is also a great opportunity to bring Jon into the conversation. And I think when we start thinking about all these ads that are out there, and we're constantly navigating them as professionals ourselves. First of all, actually, how about we just start with, if you don't mind, just describing System 1, Jon, and how do you score the effectiveness of ads?
Yeah, great question. Well, my job is basically taking the work Orlando does and turning it into something that can help all our customers make the kind of work that's effective. And what Orlando's done over very many years working with the IPA data set is deconstruct what kinds of emotions lead to long-term business effects. And it's really quite powerful. We understand, for example, that happiness is the most powerful emotion because it lodges in our long-term memory. It makes us feel better towards a brand. We're more likely to buy it in the future. And so what Orlando's work tells us is there's a strong correlation between advertising that creates happiness and creates a powerful emotional response and the market share that brand enjoys over the next 12 months.
Right.
And so if you look at, going back to something we were talking about earlier, actually, if you just looked at media spend alone, you get a weak correlation. But if you overlay on top of that the creative effectiveness as defined by the type and strength of emotion that the creative generates, you get a very strong correlation. And that potentially has got very profound impacts. We talked about Paul Dyson's work. If creativity is the second most powerful tool at your disposal, and I actually argue, by the way, it's the most powerful because the number one is brand size. You can't change your brand size, right?
So you need creative to get there.
Right. Brand size is the outcome, right? So if you take all the input measures, creativity is the number one input measure any marketer has at their disposal. So what we've been able to do at System 1 is measure emotion and correlate it to market share gains in the next 12 months. Now, the reason that's so important, I mean, sort of my role, I've never worked in research before, by the way, and I've always been client side, but I have used System 1 to help make decisions in the development of advertising, because when you're committing to usually a very large amount of money and you need to convince people in your business it's a good investment, What System 1 are able to do is provide a test, usually in 24 hours, that will measure the emotional response to the advertising and actually predict your market share impact. Now, of course, it assumes, it makes a lot of assumptions about how much money you might spend on media and so on. But the ability to predict when you're in the process of developing an advert is incredibly powerful, because it gives you lots of confidence in it while you're developing it, and it helps you make the business case as well for creativity. Because I guess up to now, most market research is rear view mirror, isn't it? So I did the campaign, I look at my Nielsen data, did it increase my share? What's my brand tracking telling me about how it changed my brand equity measures? But we can actually predict through the process, and of course we can help you improve. And this is where Orlando's books are just, it's a bit like kind of revealing the source code about how advertising works. It's incredible. And in fact, I very often do, talks to our customers about how to be a good judge of creative. And really, I direct them to some of the key pages in Orlando's book that show the features in advertising that grab our attention, that lead to an emotional response, that lead to long-term gains. And it's funny, actually, once you understand what Orlando has revealed in his book, you kind of don't look at advertising again in the same way. You can immediately spot, well, that's clearly a sales activation, because it's using these left brain features. That's really effective brand building using right brain features. But to answer your question in terms of System 1, our job is to take Orlando's work and our understanding of how advertising works and provide it as a platform solution for our customers to be able to test at scale quickly and effectively whether their communication is actually going to deliver the sort of outcome that they want to have.
Mm-hmm. It's such a fascinating, 10 years or even more, like let's say Mad Men era, like you would never have had the ability to be able to pre-test like we're talking about now. 10 years ago, we probably wouldn't have had that chance either. No. But it's such a fascinating concept to be able to check on creative before actually committing to creative.
Yeah.
And to have some of the evidence that you guys have is super helpful, because it provides sort of that confidence that what you're predicting is actually going to become truth when you actually put it in market. So it's a great service to be able to offer, because you're often committed. We were just talking to Grace about budget building. And so there's this common thing that you're under committing to budget and the distribution of your creative. And so I think part of that is because nobody wants to put all their chips in because they're just not sure. Yeah.
Well, actually, I'll tell you the moment that I started using System 1. So I was working on the UK's number one energy drink. We'd gone through a big crisis where we had to reformulate because of the sugar tax introduced into the UK. And we actually relaunched the brand with a brand new positioning, huge investment in advertising. A massive, massive investment. The biggest, in fact, in the company's history. And I had a very short amount of time to turn the campaign around. I had about 8 weeks, which is really, really, really tight. So there's no way we could have done qualitative research. We could never have spent 3 or 4 weeks gathering focus groups up and down the country and, navel gazing about, what Barbara and Scarborough thought about it, right? So we couldn't do that. But I was being asked before the money was committed by the board, and it was the biggest investment the company was going to make in the entire year. So we're talking about it would impact on the P&L, it would impact on whether people got bonus, it would impact on whether we could turn the brand around and get it back into growth. Huge implications. Mm-hmm. So the business question I was asked is, how can we be confident in the creative route you're proposing before we sign off on the money? And it was then that I remembered I met the founder, John Kieran of System 1. We were in doing a business school event together, and I remember hearing him talking about this ability to predict. And so I called him up and said, I think I've got a good brief for you. Can you come in and tell us how this works? Because I might be about to need your services. And it was magical, because not only, in fact, it's quite a fun story, because not only did it allow me to create confidence amongst my colleagues about how good this idea was, it also meant it resolved any tension with my creative agency about which route we were going to go down and which execution was best. So it reduced that tension. It meant I could go to my customers and say, I've already got one of the biggest campaigns of this year in the can, and it's going to drive sales. So I want my customers to give more shelf space over to my brand and things like that. It also meant that the CFO, when we got to budget cutting, it was a brilliant meeting because he said, well, I will go around the room to every single person except for Jon, and I'll look at your budgets first, because he's measured the return on investment that this campaign is going to bring. It is, isn't it, as well? And then when it came to the board review, I was able to go into the board and say, within the next 12 months, this is what I predict will happen. Nothing in life is certain, and everything is subject to the sun shining and the economy going up, and we know that. But it gave me a level of confidence that I would not have had I not been working with System 1. And that is why I joined, because I realized that, as we talked about, the importance of creativity, the importance of being able to have confidence in your work, and marketing. I mean, marketing is one of those disciplines that is not an exact science. It's not like you're the sales director where you can go, we sold this much yesterday, or you're the finance director, this is exactly how much money we made. Marketing, because you're building the future, it's less predictable and it's more risky. And System 1 enables you to handle that risk, very effectively. And I should say, sorry to end my pitch, but also very quickly and cost effectively, because of course, when you're making advertising or making innovation as well, we do innovation testing as well. But when we're making advertising, you're making decisions by the hour, but by the day. You don't have time to have a long period of time off to go and do some complex research. So we built the system to give you answers in as little as 3 hours. In fact, we can run quite fast, and that makes all the difference between delaying a project and getting it to air on time.
That's incredible. I love all the different, if you think about, like Mark said, we talked to Grace Kite, we just released that pod, but around budget planning, but having something like this as well in your arsenal can help. It's like, we used to have a leader that would say, well, why do you think you only need $2 million? Why don't you need $10 million? And I don't think as marketers, we could really justify, or we kept leaning on some of those other metrics that we had access to try to define,
like ROAS.
Yeah. ROI's evil cousin.
Well, that's right, because in the other thing that's happened since 2006, correlating, is the growth of performance marketing, and we know it as podcasters, right? That there's nothing like the drug of downloads after you've released an episode, is there? and marketers. Sorry, there we'll
sorry
in joke, but how's yesterday looking? Anyway, but no, that's what happens, right?
Totally.
You become obsessed with the short term, and it's because of the availability of data that means you get this addiction to how much have I done today, yesterday, tomorrow. But meanwhile, your focus is not on the kind of broad beam brand building potential that Orlando talks about. And you've got to balance. I mean, this is, the great and the good in our industry will tell you, you've got to do both. And I suppose what we're on earth to do is to provide people with the tools to value the long-term brand building advertising as much as the performance, immediate data-led advertising.
Lasting effects, as I like to call them.
Lasting.
Long-term effects.
Yeah, when in the prep we had this conversation about lasting versus how do we phrase it? Well, we talk about performance marketing all the time, and then we talk about brand building. But then brand building has this idea of like, the impact will happen sometime in the future. Yeah, and I loved how you phrased that before about lasting and why can you just explain why you say lasting?
Well, I think that
language matters.
It's a clever move to call performance advertising, isn't it? Because who wouldn't want that? Who wants to wait for these long-term effects? When they're going to happen? It's a bit vague and somewhere in the future, isn't it? Whereas, actually, brand building advertising can work on the people who are in the market right now, but it works on the people, importantly, who aren't in the buying window right now and who will buy in the future. And I think it creates this sort of these lasting effects, that in years to come, could be years, could be months, as well as people in the market right now. It's sort of it helps to build that future mental availability. And so I think it's talking about long-term effects is not very good framing on our part. And it's important to think, because I mean, who wouldn't want a lasting effect? Who wants just a ephemeral effect, which is what you tend to get with performance advertising. It's picking off the low hanging fruit right now, and you get these sales spikes, but it's difficult to maintain. And if you focus on that for too long, it will undermine your base sales and your margins. It can work for a while, but you've really got to have this brand building going on at the same time. And brand building is really the more important kind of advertising. More sophisticated, difficult type of advertising to get right as well, because it doesn't rely on targeting for people to be got at. So that's why I think it's important to try to reframe the debate a bit.
Yeah, it's a fascinating conversation. Jon and Orlando both, we talked about some sample ads and kind of walking through some of the good, the bad, and the ugly. So if you can, I would love to chat about like a couple of, or an example of a bad ad. We'll just call it a bad ad, but one that would probably typify sort of the narrow focused left brain sort of idea, and just kind of talk about it. Do you guys have an example we can?
I mean, I suppose rather than think about it as a bad ad, it would be, the sort of ad that, I mean, there are these two, I talk about narrow beam attention, left brain features to nudge people towards a purchase who are already interested in the brand and in the buying window. That's performance advertising, I think. And then you've got advertising for broad beam attention, which assumes no inherent interest in the brand, but seeks to create interest in the brand and to lodge it in memory. And that's brand building advertising, which, requires us to think about some of these right brain features, music, metaphor, characters, all of those things. So in Look Out, I talk about, these, and I overlay them on business effects and show how these two different types of advertising with different features lead to these different types of effect, nudging people towards a map download or whatever else, if it's a narrow beam left brain performance ad. And in the right brain's case, for broad beam attention, features of advertising that drive salience, trust, sales, profit, and share gain. And so that's it's probably better to talk about in those terms.
Yeah,
but
I appreciate that.
So one of the ads that I draw on in Lemon was it was an ad for GoDaddy, which I have shown a few times when I present, but it's really this narrow beam kind of attention. Everything is very close up. There's a focus on things. So, a car is flashed up, a hairdryer, when you see people, it's just bits of them. Or if you do see their heads at all, they're looking straight at you rather blankly and devitalized. Everything's quite flat. So there's no sense of place or a sense of depth. There are words being flashed up on the screen, telling you what to think and do. There's someone pointing at you at the end. It's very direct. It's very me at you. It's very rhythmic too. And it feels very self-conscious. And there's a slight air of almost menace to it, people in a boxing ring, and it's dark. And it's that there's just something quite, when you look at those features, it very much seems to me as if it is an ad designed for narrow beam attention. People who are in the window right now. And that's, if you're at that stage of growth, then that's probably, a young company just building your early stages of building your company, then that's probably okay. But when you get to a certain size, it's not enough. So you need to go to broader reach, but you also need to go to advertising that lodges you in memory, that makes your brand famous, and that requires the other type the right brain kind of advertising, which normally involves, character, incident, and place. Some people doing something in a defined location that's perhaps slightly out of the ordinary, but nevertheless relatable.
That is a great example, and we'll link to that in the show notes so people can have a visual representation of what the ad that you're speaking about. And now, John, I was thinking, like, was this ad ever, and I'm using air quotes now, but loaded into System 1, and how did it score?
Yes. Well, the what we've built at System 1 is I think kind of cool, but we've built a platform in the US and UK that automatically tests most ads that go on air in most categories.
Okay.
And the reason we do that actually is quite a smart reason, because if you're wanting to work, Orlando talked earlier about excess share of voice, and we understand the idea that your ability to outspend your competitor relative to your market share will predict share gain. And the same thing happens with, your creative. Your creative is like an amplifier to that effect, but it only works if your creative quality is better than your competitors. Now, how do you know that, right? Because people can test their own advertising. They rarely spend the money testing everything else that goes out in their category. So we've actually done that for them. So we've committed a rather insane amount of money. I won't say how much, but we've gone all in as a business to say, well, if we really are the world's leading creative measurement platform, we need to be able to have a point of view on everything. We can't just go, well, according to the ads that we test for our own customers, right? Therefore, we have a point of view on everything. So the only way to do that is to test everything, which is a massive commitment. But what it means is within 24 hours of a new ad going on TV, on YouTube, on a number of other channels, we've got it fed into our system, uploaded onto our platform with the result, which is kind of cool. So an interesting statistic for you. You'll remember, of course, the famous quote, half my advertising is wasted. I just don't know which half. Wanamaker died 100 years ago this year. On our database, 85,000 ads, going back for the last 5 years, US, UK. The actual answer is 49%. So Wanamaker is a profit. I mean, that guy got it bang on, right? In terms of long-term brand, but I should caveat, in terms of long-term brand building, half the advertising that gets aired will have no impact on the market share. Now, of course, a lot of that is performance advertising. Therefore, it's driving short-term sales response, and that's that'll be different. But for long-lasting effects, as Orlando describes it, so the answer to your question is yes, we are able to see the results of all advertising, which is brilliant. So, what is interesting actually, in answer to your "is there a bad ad?" I'd say there probably is a bad ad, because you get brands that do long-lasting effects that also do short-term as well. Yep. So it's possible to do brand building that actually does work quite effectively in the short term. We see that quite a lot. It's almost impossible to do it the other way around, to have a very, what we call spike. I mean, we have star and spike as our sort of descriptions of those two things. It's unusual to see a spiky ad, which would be most Cannes Lion winners, by the way. Most Cannes Lion winners are designed to shock you, right? They're designed to kind of make you do something now, and rarely have lasting impacts on the brands that Burger King, Moldy Whopper. There you go. There's almost the perfect example, right? Yeah. So it shocked you. You talked about it. You probably shared it, and so on. In the moment, it was very newsworthy. Our system would suggest that long term, it didn't necessarily do anything for your perception or the feelings you had towards the brand. So that'd be a good example of what I'm talking about. Now, bad advertising, I suppose, would be advertising that does neither. And actually, there are lots of ads on our database that neither do star nor do spike, because they're hard to remember. The brand wasn't very present. They didn't really communicate. They had too many scenes. There was an overload of messages, and so people just took nothing out. So that probably a bad ad is probably an ad that does neither a short-term job or a lasting job.
There's actually, the point you just made is interesting, because there is a study, I can't remember the name of the study, but talking about the effectiveness of ads when you have 1 versus 2 versus 3 versus 4 messages. Are you seeing that kind of thing in the work you're doing as well? Like cramming so much in that nobody remembers anything because there's just so much there.
Well, it's funny, Mark. I love the fact you said that, because it's a Millward Brown study that suggests the more messages you have, the less gets remembered overall. And Orlando will remember, I phoned him up last week going, we must have a better version than that. What's our take on this? Because we are always telling our customers, reduce the amount of messages. You don't need the voiceover and the action and the words on the screen. You know, actually, the less you say, the more you get remembered. But Orlando, you had some
I had a
very interesting additional insights.
In that, you know,
yes.
what we did with the IPA's database, and I looked at, you know, the ability of a set of ads to, and I tested these ads with our approach. It was the ads that had the better sort of, or the more intended message takeout, I should say. So the people who took out the message from the ads, they were the campaigns that performed less well than the ones that performed emotionally and connected, you know, through kind of meta communication, music, humor, you know, and those other storytelling, I suppose. Because we're trying, you know, you're trying to create mental availability here, really, and you know, sometimes a single-minded message. You know, of course, it can be extremely effective, but it doesn't. It's a different kind of style of advertising, and you know, you go back to Rossa Reeves and his USP, and we just need to make that very clear and hit people with it as much as we can. You know, massive frequency, and ultimately we'll sort of drill it into them. That's a different style of advertising from the sort of entertainment carnivalesque style of advertising that draws people in and puts things in memory. You know, characters, for instance. You know, you can create lovely little playlets with characters where the message is, you know, received in a very natural way, but you know, it's not the same style of advertising that, you know, it tries to impart a very specific USP. So yeah, there are different ways in which advertising works, but it's certainly, I kind of agree with that study, actually. You know, you as a great creative who did the covers of the books, actually, Adrian Holmes said to me once, you know, you throw 10 tennis balls at people, and it's very unlikely they'll catch any of them. You throw one of them, they might just catch it. So yeah, I think that's a great example for that.
And I suppose, like, that's the point in a lot of ways of marketers to say, well, which ball do we want them to catch? Because they could, even if they did catch one, it might not be the one you really want.
Yeah, and then think of an interesting way in which to throw it that enables it to be caught.
Yeah,
fair.
Yeah.
Fair.
Jon, going back to kind of, I'm kind of want to geek out here a little bit, but like I'm genuinely intrigued here by, you know, the idea of measurement, because now you're arming brand professionals with something extremely tangible, because something that really only was reserved to, you know, performance marketers. And I think, like, what we were talking about this earlier, in the sense that I think the rise of performance marketing was because they were really closer to a lot of those metrics. ROAS, we talked about, their ability to kind of show revenue in that moment and really defend a lot of their tactics, where brand marketers took a back seat because they didn't have that same availability in terms of, like, the information. So as we're thinking about this now, and we're seeing a lot of industries constantly bombarding consumers, is there an industry that you're seeing likely growing more or being able to kind of really appeal to the consumer a lot better than others? Or is it really just, you know, anything that is, actually, I'll just end there. I'm just going to go ramble now, but yeah.
Well, the short answer are those people working with System 1, obviously. So I'm being tongue in cheek, but anyone working with us obviously is doing that. But no, I mean, that's what we're here to do, isn't it? It's really interesting one about. Do you know what? There are, in my experience, I've been at System 1 3 years, and I'm formerly CMO, now responsible for customers as well, and I would say that you've got two camps where we're seeing the change, I think, in terms of measurement of brand and so on. So you have maybe the classic FMCG clients of ours. So a wonderful example. Sorry, I'm I'm going to give you a British example now, but Yorkshire Tea, right, would be a really brilliant case study of where they really understand the role of brand building, and they're measuring and they understand the impact it has, and they've done an amazing job. So they were the number 3 tea brand 10 years ago. They're now the number 1. They've gone from 10% share to 30% share.
Incredible. It's
one of the best case studies you've ever seen. And Orlando references their advertising in the book as well, because they do all the right. I mean, if you could tick a box on the right brain, it would be Yorkshire Tea advertising, right? So they are the professionals at it. So they'd be a great example. So they're some of the more enlightened CPG, you'd call it in Canada, wouldn't you? Yeah. The enlightened CPG customers are probably where you'd expect us to be kind of working and seeing that happening. However, the other end of it is actually tech businesses. So we're, I probably shouldn't mention our customers, should I, by name, but we're working with the UK's biggest broadcaster. We're working with the UK's biggest advertiser, the UK's biggest streaming service. In America, we've got similar customers to those as well. And actually, what we're realizing is that the big technology platforms are waking up to the power of creativity, because I suppose they've been so performance marketing driven that they've realized that the difference between good and great is creative. Wow. And it's almost like there's been no mechanism to understand that differential. And now they're realizing that they want their advertisers, for example, on media platforms, want their advertisers to have a better ROI. Of course they do, right? And they realize the only way to do that is to get the creative quality up. So weirdly, we're actually seeing a lot of technology platforms that you'd think would be entirely performance driven and less open to this kind of conversation. They're wide awake to it, actually, and they're very, very engaged, because I think they realize the upside is huge.
V and I have talked about this a few times, but we both went into digital. Well, he got in before I did, but I was in broadcast media before, and I was a rep selling media, and I was trying to pick off a lot of the Yellow Page advertisers at the time, thinking they would buy broadcast media. And then the Yellow Pages disappeared. I lost my lead gen sheets because the Yellow Pages kept shrinking. And so it was this death of kind of story that kept happening over and over again. I was sitting inside of that business going, why isn't anybody talking about measurement? Why isn't anybody doing this? And now fast forward a bunch of years, there's a lot of stuff coming out from Think TV, and I don't know if you guys do work with them, but
we do. Yeah,
a lot of it is connected to what you're talking about, Orlando, and I'm super excited to see these things happen, because there is a value. I'm media agnostic. I think, whatever by any means necessary to get the reach you're looking for, to get delivery of what you're trying to deliver. And there's a huge value in TV and traditional mediums. And I think a lot of it is the broad beam stuff that you're talking about that you just can't get from a search ad.
Yeah. That's absolutely right. Yeah. So, I mean, I'd probably add attention to your list, there. So reach and how much attention is given to the platform or to the channel, because if not very much attention is given to it, you really haven't got much chance to put things in memory. So it might work as a sort of poster or a billboard, because you've only got a second or so. But don't think that you're dealing with much more than that in certain circumstances.
Well, Orlando, the best example I've seen you present on that was the work with Lumen, and we tested an ad by a very well-known technology company, which was incredibly left-brained, and then we tested an ad by a very well-known credit card company, which basically had all the right brain things. It had a story unfolding,
but yes, it wasn't as well known as a tech company. Yeah.
Not quite as well known as tech company, but very well known. We'd all recognise the brands in question. The credit card company, had a scene with gorillas playing cricket, right, which is a bit weird. And then you were like, is this real? Is this not real? And then of course you realize that they were actors, but they'd fooled the audience into thinking they're real gorillas. Right?
That's amazing.
Yeah.
It was about fraud. Yes. The idea behind it was, if only all fraud was easy as this to detect, right? And then the credit card company, right? The other ad for a well-known technology tech platforms launching a new product and demonstrating the product almost on repeat. It's like, just repeating the idea.
From its
very
context,
close up.
Just the product.
It was, exaggerate. And you can actually imagine who I'm talking about, because they do that sort of thing a lot. And then what we did with Lumen is we mentioned the actual minutes of attention that both those ads got on different platforms, from a Facebook feed through to Instagram and through to YouTube and so on and so forth. Now, and then we rated the ads for creative quality. One ad is a 1-star, the other ad is a 5-star. So we're pulling apart, in terms of best and worst for lasting effects, I should say, just to caveat that. Right. Now, what we found is that the delta in terms of minutes of attention was 2.5 times. So the 5-star ad on an attention-rich platform like TV was getting 2.5 times more minutes of actual consumption than the other one. But then the low attention platforms were getting a fraction of that. So what you had is the difference between a high attention-rich platform and good creative and bad creative on an low attention platform was like 10 or 12 to 1. I mean, the difference is astonishing. But it kind of makes the point about the importance of media planning and thinking about attention as well as, reach, because it doesn't make no point reaching if people don't pay attention. And then secondly, once they pay attention, 2.5 times difference between a 1-star and a 5-star just goes to show you why Paul Dyson's creativity was number 2.
That's right, John. What you point out is something that I found, Karen Nelson Fields found, is that on a low attention medium, you've got a good ad and a bad ad, there'll be very little difference in their performance. You put them both on a high attention medium, and the higher, the better ad pulls away, and so, these, I suppose, lower attention platforms tend to remove the creative dividend that you get, with really, I suppose, high performing creative work. So you do need to take attention, I think, into account for the medium.
Yeah, there's like 800 more questions I want to ask you guys, but I know we're running short on time. I do want to ask one question that comes up all the time. This would be my last one, but the one thing that comes up all the time for me is often, well, okay, that's fine for CPG or, retail or whatever, but I'm in B2B, and Jon, you mentioned tech companies before. So I just wanted to check in with you in terms of the B2B side of things. And I know Salesforce has characters as an example. I see that all the time. So is this something that applies to all businesses, whether they're B2B, B2C, or any particular industry more than others?
It does. We have done the testing in B2B, and so I remember I mentioned the 49% in terms of brand building to 51. That's total database. When you cut it by B2B, it goes to 80-20 or 77-23, I think, are the exact statistics. So within B2B, you're talking about 1 in 4 adverts are impactful from a brand building, long lasting effect point of view. Now, the thing I think, of course, is that we don't stop being human beings when we go to work, right? We don't turn our emotion off, do we? And advertising doesn't change the way it works magically because we're sat in our home office rather than walking past a poster down the road. So, and I think that's what we forget, is that we assume that we're always in a buying mode when we're in B2B. But the Ehrenberg Bass did some astonishingly good bit of research, very simple actually, a guy called John Dawes, that in B2B situations, 95% of the time, we are not in a buying situation. Only 5% of the time are we in a consideration moment for that particular product, which has massive implications. Because if you think about that, that means within B2B, we still need to be thinking about how we build brands, how we build memory, how we create the right kind of emotion that lodges that brand into memory. So Hence why we've done lots of work with the B2B Institute over at LinkedIn to understand this and to try and promote the use of brand building even in B2B environments. So yes is the answer. There's a huge opportunity. Salesforce, by the way, are brilliant, absolutely brilliant. So they really understand this, and they've built characters, they tell stories, and they're incredibly fluent, as Word Orlando describes, in terms of the way they create their branding. So there are people doing it well.
We're fast approaching here. Black Friday, Cyber Monday. And it becomes in a very highly intense period of time from an advertising perspective. My final question would be this: is there any advice that you would solicit to any advertiser on how to break through some of that clutter moving into Black Friday, Cyber Monday?
Gosh.
Maybe I should have put that first.
Gotcha.
That's a big one. I'll do a short answer. Orlando, I'll do a short answer.
Please
you do the long answer.
No, do.
I would do a Tide ad.
Yeah.
I would take the Mickey out of Black Friday. That's what I would do, because everything looks the same, sounds the same, says the same. Yeah. And what Tide brilliantly did in the Super Bowl was actually kind of take the Mickey out of the whole genre of Super Bowl advertising. So personally, if it was me, I would use humor and surprise to get cut through.
That's actually, of course, what DDB did with their VW ads in the 60s, and indeed Chivas Regal and many others. They were as much poking fun at other advertising and other advertisers as they were, being disarmingly open and honest about their own brands. And I think that tone of voice, actually, we've lost that tone of voice. We've lost that way of talking about brands. Everything's become very sort of literal, hasn't it? And self-conscious. We've
transactional.
Kind of self-aware sense of, fun, really, that connects with people, that people find endearing and interesting, and makes them want to know more.
Well, and I suppose the other thing to say is if you've done a really good job of building your brand before Black Friday, and you stand for something, you're distinctive, you have a personality, there's a story you've been telling, then you can carry all that into however you do Black Friday and be remembered.
That's true.
As opposed to defaulting to the standard thing that everyone else is doing.
By now, we're at more discount than somebody else. And
exactly.
Maybe you should put prices up in Black Friday just to see what happens.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's what brand building advertising enables you to hold your price,
right.
Very important, actually, at the moment with inflation as it is, and, kind of on the edge of recession. So brand building advertising is what helps to sort of build a bit of a moat around you to help you to stay the course a little bit. Also, interestingly enough, helps, if you're borrowing money, it helps you with lower interest rates on your credit. Because if you've got a stronger brand, I saw some research this week showing this, that you are in a better place to, borrow money and at lower rates. So very other interesting side effects of having a strong brand.
Guys, this has just been amazing to chat with
Incredible.
you. I so appreciate all your insights and sharing all the information and examples and all your work, Orlando, and all your work, Jon. So thanks very much.
Pleasure.
How can people find out more about you?
Well, they could go to the System 1 website, couldn't they, Jon?
They could.
So that'd be one place to go. Or get in touch with us on LinkedIn. I think we both have a presence there. Jon also has his own Uncensored CMO.
It's amazing.
At Uncensored CMO. Yeah.
Exactly. But so I think hopefully you can find us if you'd like to chat, and we'd love to chat to you.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. Appreciate all your time.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
And now the Postpod with V and Marc.
Postpod. Did I do it right?
It's one word or a hyphenated word. I think you did great.
Thanks, man. Oh my god.
Oh, that was one of the best ever.
I wasn't thinking about the countdown and counting in. I was just going to continue the conversation. But we can jump right in.
Orlando and Jon, D.
Well, it was
awesome.
It was a treat having them on the show with us, honestly.
Totally. Totally.
I think we're big fans, obviously, of Jon's Uncensored CMO podcast.
Yeah.
And just being able to talk about mics for the first little bit. And I know our listeners didn't get that at the beginning, but it was quite fun.
Yeah. Yeah, that was fun. Yeah, and there's so much stuff there between the two of them that I thought was great. The theory part with Orlando, and then the practice part, and the evidence that Jon was referring to. They both do both, but they're kind of playing those roles. You know, one of the things for me that I wrote a note about was, I think it was Orlando. We were talking about how many messages should you put in creative.
Oh yeah. And
there was this story about, or an analogy that we had about balls. Yeah. And you can throw a whole bunch of balls up in the air or at a person, and they may catch one if you throw 10 at them. Or you could just pick one ball and throw it at them. And there's a way better chance that the person's going to catch that ball.
Totally.
Which I thought was really cool and a powerful analogy, because there's so many times you get like just a lot of voices at the table about what to say. Yeah. And you never like anchor on one thing to say. And then the other thing that he said that was, I thought, really cool was, you got to also throw the ball in a way that it can be caught. Like, you don't want to throw a fastball at someone that's standing 10 feet in front of you.
Watch out.
You know what I mean? Yeah. That could be the new name of his book, of his next book. Not Look Out.
Watch out.
Watch out. Here comes the heater.
Yeah.
So I just really like that analogy, because it was, I think, powerful for me as a visual reference to thinking about this.
Yeah. You know what? I think we can even unpack that for a moment, because I think all too often when we're working industry, we're thinking about trying to cram or keep a lot of the different, I guess, disciplines constantly happy. So I remember like, even when you're trying to develop an email, it's like, well, did you make sure you had the footwear message in there? Make sure you have the outerwear message as well. And you're throwing so much at a consumer at once, where it's like, well, maybe we should just say, hey, the store has up to 50% off this week across all categories. You just kind of go down that rabbit hole yourself and find what you may be interested in. Right. But again, it goes back to that analogy. What are you choosing to throw to the consumer versus, hey, let's just throw everything and let's see what sticks. That can't be very efficient.
No. And I think that part of it leads to that idea that Orlando had as well about broad versus narrow beam. And I like some of the ways that he was using it. Like, nobody wants to wait forever.
No. For
a brand campaign to work.
Nope.
And so I like the idea of lasting effects, or with that language about speaking about things that way. And then conversely, the short-term narrow beam type of stuff is the things you look at and you go, oh, we want more ROI.
Yeah.
Or we got to, do the things that are driving a higher ROI. And so then you get caught up in the metrics that are in front of you, which are things like last click attribution, things like attention spans are shrinking. And, people don't watch a video on Facebook for more than a second and a half. Yeah. So then you start like adjusting your approach and ultimately your strategy because of some platform that's giving you a number, but the platforms don't know what your strategy is. They have their own strategy.
Totally. And as we go down this, and every guest that we bring on, we talk about, the nuances of marketing, brand specifically and whatnot. I'm not going to say I'm ashamed of being or have been a performance marketer, because I think there's an extreme amount of value there. But if I think about,
my name is V, I'm a recovering performance marketer.
Exactly. But you know what? I think, let me just a focus group of one. Yeah, I contributed to this idea of short-termism, trying to make sure that my channels were constantly funded adequately. We were testing and learning. We were doing everything, but showing value through the knee-jerk
metrics that we have. But the more and more we talk about brand and we think about brand, we had Sandeep on the previous podcast about the cognitive side of branding. Like for me, actually, there was an article just recently, Airbnb, they pulled all their performance dollars out, right? And they just invested in the brand. They're finding that it's going well. It's doing really well. Why should we be surprised? Really?
Yeah.
I think I constantly want to be a better marketer. And I think now I'm coming to that realization that not only is it a balancing act of nurturing intent and capitalizing on that intent, but, we're talking to Grace about like the 60-40 split and whatnot, offline versus online language that we should be using versus it being like performance marketing versus not performance marketing. All these little subtleties make a difference. And one thing that both you and Orlando touched on that I thought was extremely important, and it was early on in the conversation, was just like, advertising has that noble role, and it's okay that we just make great ads without trying to find that purpose or some of the things. And definitely don't be apologetic for what we do.
Totally.
And tying that all together, I think, is what's extremely important. And something with a platform like System 1 now arms marketers with even more information and data to push and really kind of make the the brand story even more complete.
Yeah, Jon had that really interesting case that he talked about. I don't remember all the specific details, but he basically had pre-tested a bunch of things in his campaign, estimated because of pre-testing, estimated the financial impact 6, 8, 12 months down the road. And then when it came time for, I think everybody have to justify their requests on their investment. His was the only one that he didn't have to defend it because he already had all his numbers in, and everyone else had to defend it. Yeah, had to defend their own.
Think about all the times that, and we've both seen it, but like the struggle on the brand side, or really kind of showing that value, is the biggest barrier to achieving potentially what marketers want to in that moment from a spend perspective, or really trying to capitalize on an idea. And it just came down because they were short on information and data. But I would argue that's not the case anymore. There's enough avenues for you to collect enough information to show the efficacy of your brand campaigns in a way that actually you can tell that story internally and show and continue to drive value.
Yeah, I agree. And I think from a point of view of effective creative, Orlando also had a good point where it wasn't necessarily to say things are good or bad. It's more, I think it was more appropriate, slightly more nuanced maybe, to say that there are campaigns that are for building memory, the lasting effects, that things that have broad reach, that tell stories, that are helps build the recall. But then there are also campaigns that are meant to be, very flat, very quick, very sharp. And the purpose of those campaigns is ROAS and ROI. Like you need both.
You do.
I don't think anybody's saying you shouldn't do both. I think everybody, though, that we've been talking about really is saying, including I've been listening to a lot more Chris Walker's stuff and listening back to the podcast we do with him. Yeah. He's also in the B2B space, and same with Ty when we talked to her. Like, it's not about either or, it's about both. Yeah. And it's important because I think you need to feed the now, but you also have to farm or fertilize for later, right?
And again, the best way to fertilize is making sure that you have enough of that, the velocity behind, I guess, your brand, if you will, to ensure like you do, or you are able to, build salience or build like that mental availability that, Jon talked to. I think Orlando touched on it as well. But, there was another thing that really struck me, and I called it out while we were talking to them, where you talked about like how society has shifted, right? And sometimes you see it in things like color. And one thing, honestly, it really
the cars.
Yeah, it really struck me because there is this fascination right now with those flat colors, and it's, is it a byproduct of the environment we're currently operating in, the way we're thinking and the way we are, and we didn't even realize it, I don't know. It's just the psychology behind a lot of this stuff is fascinating to me.
Totally. Yeah, I think so. I think even at that, like the most powerful emotion, that was also interesting too, thinking about psychology and human brains and that kind of stuff. Happiness was really the thing that they landed on.
Yeah.
For all the stuff that we talk about when you think about positioning and solving people's problems, like that's good, but I mean, maybe they don't want to hear about their problems. Totally. Maybe they just want to feel happy. And if you're a path to that happiness, not to say that you are the reason for their happiness, but you can solve a problem and that will make you happy. That will make you happy. I think that's an interesting thing, to find a space for a brand to sit in that pocket.
Well, I'm just reading. So I think you've already done this class, but we're doing the framework around get job done, getting job done. Jobs to get done.
Yeah.
And what's interesting around that is how do you position it from being consumer centric and using the lens of the consumer versus using the lens, if you will, of an organization, which may be a little bit myopic at times. But the premise of this is fascinating because you can draw those parallels to emotion, right? To help build that customer centricity, if you will, for your product, service, or whatever you're offering. And I think that sometimes it gets lost because we get stuck in the minutia of the operation of the business, where we lose sight of what is it actually that we're trying to achieve, or what is it that our consumers want us to do. And I think that's the important thing.
Yeah, that's a good point. The operational comment you just made makes me think of, again, going back to the jobs to be done and connecting that with happiness. You can communicate a message in a lot of different ways.
Yeah.
And it could just be very matter of fact, which is maybe what, I hope I'm not butchering this, but maybe that's what Orlando is referring to, is that a lot of copy is just very flat.
Yeah.
It's just getting the job done because you've discovered something, some solution that customers are looking for, and you're executing a piece of creative very flatly because it's not going to ruffle any feathers. Yeah. Whereas if you try and execute it with an emotion, like how you tell a story, how do you include characters, how do you, bring emotion into it? You can do all those kinds of things and still get the job done, but then that requires a whole other level of potentially risk and creativity.
But could probably pay out dividends for you, for the organization, right? I keep thinking about some of the brands that continuously do well in that space where they're, we can keep it local here too. But for me, WestJet, when you think about some of their, the Christmas Miracle campaigns, their April Fool campaigns, they have an ability, they've been able to create a connection with their guests in a way that allows them to continuously just, rekindle some of that emotion that started, I want to say, 10, 15 years ago. And they're just building on it. And that's the I think that's the important thing. It was Roger Martin that talked about the fact that, not everything needs to be a rebrand. You don't have to go down that path because you could disrupt the ability for, a consumer and the mind structures that they've created with your brand. So anyways, the long and short of it is how do you, again, find ways to elicit emotion in a way that it can really naturally sit well with your consumer group. System 1 has, by the way, a fantastic framework that you can kind of really gauge the efficacy of these campaigns before they even air, which is an amazing tool to have from a marketing perspective. Make sure that it is hitting or connecting all the dots that you need it to connect to make sure that you can, at the end of the day, drive revenue for the company.
Yeah. Well, even on that, just the idea of testing, like,
Yeah.
I used to think of it as being something very sophisticated that, big companies only did and all that kind of stuff. But you can genuinely test no matter what size of company you're with. Like, insofar as, like, if you can sketch out a storyboard, then you can test something. And it's very low cost at that point to make some changes. But if you get too far down the road, then it becomes really expensive. I think I'm quoting Jennifer Real, but
yeah.
But yeah, if you like a sketchboard, bouncing ideas off people, like putting some messages in front of customers, even just get some feedback from them. Does that sound right? Does that not sound right? Like, it doesn't have to be something super formal if you're in a smaller organization, but having a tool like that is like next level. That's pretty awesome.
I think it's game changing. Honestly, like, I'll be completely transparent. I had heard of them, but I never had an opportunity to work with them. Guess what? They're on my radar now.
Yeah. Cool. You got any other little sound bites or tidbits from that?
The one thing that I want to spend more time with is a book, Orlando. Well, both books, like Lemon.
Mm-hmm.
He talked about it very loosely at the beginning of the conversation, but it's such a well written book that gives you a lot of that theory, and I would add even psychology behind how humans behave in some of those instances, which I think is important for us as marketers to really understand, to become better at our jobs. Right. So a part of me really wish we could have almost had a conversation just around that book, but maybe we bring them on for that again. But it was just, I just thought it was so well done. And I'm looking forward to spending a little more time with that.
It is a good book. It's a good book. And it's interesting. Where I read Lemon, and I haven't read the other one yet, but it's on my radar and will be on my list soon. But from a point of view of it, in both books are the same in that it's an exploration, I think, of humanity.
Yeah.
And so from that perspective, like, I don't think every marketer has to go down, all the research that he did necessarily, but I think it's there and he's made it really accessible. It's interesting because then you get a broader sense of people, and really that's what marketing is all about, is trying to understand people. And the patterns that existed in the past, and using those to help you interpret what will happen in the future. And like, we are different, we are evolving, but we're not that radically different from the way we've been for a long time. So, the technology changes, sure, and all that kind of stuff, but a lot of our basic needs and desires don't change that much. And the trends, I think there's a lot to learn from in the past, as well as innovation. Like, the idea of the origin story has such a rich idea, a rich bed of innovation for a lot of organizations and a lot of people, and especially for marketers. So I think going down that path is great for a whole bunch of reasons. But yeah, it's great. It's great reading for sure.
I think the hot take from this podcast was Wanamaker was right. What was John saying? 48%? The actual number?
Yeah, I think 48, 49. Yeah.
What? Attaboy, Wanamaker. Yeah. That's genius, though. It's amazing. He may have just said that off the cuff, but like, it's just kind of funny that it's actually pretty close.
Yeah. Well, and I think with tools that we've got, like what they've done at System 1 and all the work that's happening now in the science of marketing, like, I think we're starting to tip the scales in our favor. And ultimately, that's all we, Vegas odds
totally
is pretty good. Vegas makes a lot of money.
I agree. Don't like going there.
Yeah, I'd never win. That's for sure.
That's why I don't like going there.
Yeah,
no,
I win when I don't play.
That's when I'm winning. No, in all honesty, like they also actually helped. I asked at the end, we had a gotcha moment, if you recall, where we talked about like the what they would advise advertisers are on Black Friday, Cyber Monday, which I thought was pretty funny.
Mm-hmm.
But at the end of the day, it's like, how can you have fun with it, right? We know the retail industry will go down like the tried, tested, and true. We called up to 60% off last year. It better not be lower than that. It better be that at the very minimum, right? And it's these little things that you get into working against a calendar, and you're just rinse, repeat, because it's the easiest thing. It's a path to least resistance. Instead of genuinely saying, you know what, how can we flip this season on its head and do something completely creative and stand out? Not many advertisers are going to do that. And then you have a whole slew of other companies now don't want to take part in Black Friday, Cyber Monday, don't want to discount, don't want to. So that's another interesting thing, right? But anyways, like I thought that was kind of cool that they both like really kind of articulated the thought of how do you have fun? Take the Mickey. I think Jon said, take the Mickey out. And just kind of have fun. So I'm like,
yeah,
I think that's. But how many will? Not many.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's a really nice segue to tease their next podcast coming out with Herman. That's a good one on pricing. That's gonna be great.
That one's awesome.
Yeah, but there is just a lot to learn for everybody in marketing, and even though human behavior maybe isn't changing, there's marketing is changing a lot for sure. Yeah. So, I think the more we understand people, the better our creative is. Yeah. The better we understand people, the better our creative gets. And creative, I genuinely think, going back to that one study, it's like if there is such a thing as a silver bullet, it's creative.
I agree.
So,
yeah, I agree.
There's a lot to be gained from making it right.
And there's no excuse for not to anymore. Honestly, like I don't know. We sometimes we talk about the Mad Men period where it's just like a bunch of people just having these think tanks and trying to navigate that. But like, think about the data that is now available. Think about all the consumer studies you can do, like the platforms like System One. You can do UX testing. Like, there's so many things available to marketers. You can make informed decisions. It's just we just have to be better.
Yeah, that's a good point, V. We just got to get better.
Just got to get better, man. So keep listening to our podcast. We'll make you better.
All of us. All of us. This has been really good for me too. Like just in general, there's just so many questions that we all have. So it's awesome having these guys being able to share their expertise.
Yeah, and I just love even these post-pods that we do together because it gives us a chance to take not only what we've learned in that moment, but we'll kind of convey it in a way that we can maybe apply it in our day-to-day. So these conversations for me are super important. So I love them.
Yeah. Okay, V. Until the next time.
It's good, man.
We got to come up with a sign-off.
We need a sign-off.
We got to figure that out. If you're listening and you have a suggestion for our sign-off, please let us know because we got the post-pod thing, and then we need
a sign-off.
Yeah, we got to figure that out. All right, buddy.
It's been a slice.
Ciao.